everybody. I'm Stephanie Baker, the Executive Director for Life in Abundance, and I want to welcome you if you are listening to this recording. I'm glad that you're with us here and able to hear what we're going to be talking about today. As we said earlier in a video, we will be releasing some interviews, some testimonials, and talking about some very important topics in the counseling industry, in the functional medical and nutrition industry. We'll be talking to quite a few people, hopefully, here over the next coming months. But today I have with us Erin, and she has been a client of Life in Abundance. She is brave and for many reasons, and she has agreed to share with you some of her story and what actually brought her to seek counseling at Life in Abundance. And we want to make this something that is hopefully not too long today, so that you can actually, we don't lose your attention, but you're able to watch it in its entirety. And so, Erin, I want to thank you for being willing to share part of your testimony with the audience that will be seeing this interview. And we'll start off with saying that there's a connotation, a negative connotation, a lot of times in related to counseling. And I'm curious if you would share with us what brought you to seek not just counseling, but Christian counseling, to be specific. And had you had counseling previously?
So I had never had counseling previously. It was one of those things that, I didn't need it. I was okay. I was doing it on my own. I grew up in church, so some of those foundational principles were already laid. Um, I knew that I needed a relationship with Christ, but like most people, just I was a believer and I went along with it. Um, until we had quite a traumatic event about 2 years ago, and that I knew at that point I couldn't do it on my own anymore. So I started looking for someone to help me. And when you look up counselors, it always, for the majority of people, it automatically will pull up, if you look on Google, random counselors, psychiatrists, all that stuff in your area. But having built my life on those foundational principles in church, I wanted something a little more pointed, and I wanted something to encourage me to keep that positive outlook that Christ gives us. And I
Mhm,
knew a standard counselor wouldn't, she might help me through the actual emotions of it, but I wanted something that would help me long term. I didn't want to just grow in place. I wanted to be able to build on the fire that I felt like God had put me in.
mhm, mhm. And remind me how you found us.
That's a God story in and of itself. I actually had heard of LIA before. One of my really good friends actually came to you guys, but honestly, that you guys weren't the first person that I looked up.
Right.
Um, a distant cousin of mine knew of the trial that we were going through, and she reached out to ask if I was seeking help. She was one of three people in the same day that reached out to ask me if I was getting help and gave me your name in the same day. Um, she then reached out to you personally, um, and God just kind of made a way for me to get in with you guys the next day, and that
Wow.
was that was completely a God moment for me.
Right. Right. And we're grateful that that worked out. So what were your expectations when you came to Life in Abundance? What were your expectations? What were you thinking was going to happen?
Honestly, I did not expect the spiritual growth that has come out of it. Um, I very much expected there to be, for lack of a better term, a positive twist to everything that was
Mhm,
horribly wrong going in my
mhm,
life at that point. And that's kind of what I was looking for at the time. Maybe not necessarily like to be able to dig deep and see God in places where I'd never been able to before. My expectations were just to deal with the emotional part of it to get through it. It at that point it wasn't so much about the end game or what was coming from the trial.
mhm. So can you share with those that might be viewing this some more specifics about what was going on in your life at that time?
Yeah.
I'd like them to understand the weight of what you were dealing with.
Okay. Um, my husband and I have been married for almost 7 years now. And we were a little older when we got married, so children were pretty much at the forefront from the minute we got married. We had fought infertility, we had fought medical issues for me. And so after all of that, we decided to adopt. And all of that was fine. We actually did bring a little boy home straight from the hospital. Um, and he was our pride and joy. He was the biggest blessing in the world. He got sick and a lot of other things unfolded. We were falsely accused of heinous acts on that child. And he actually was removed from us, and due to a paperwork error, was given back to the birth mother. We were proven completely innocent. Um, but he, at the end of it, after a year, was given back to the birth mom.
Yeah. And I'm very sorry for that loss. Um, so, would you share with us what you feel you were able to glean through um, counseling with Life in Abundance? Obviously, I have been your counselor, so that's our relationship right up front. What do you think? What do you think has been the toughest thing that you've done in counseling? Um, and what do you think you've gleaned from counseling that has been helpful?
The biggest thing that I think I've taken away from counseling by far is that God has a plan for each one of us. And even in the bad stuff, there's a purpose for that pain. Um, in our very first session, you sat with me in the prayer closet and you asked me, when we were in the middle of this battle, if God did not, for some reason, see fit to give my child back, if that was, um, if it was still worth it. And it really kind of made me stop, because in that point, I was doing everything in my power to stay positive. No, we will get him back. We will get him back. We will get him back.
Mm.
And you by no means did that to make me think negative, but
Right.
it was God preparing the journey for us, and that was almost a year before we had a final answer. Um, but that kind of allowed me to realize that even if it wasn't my plan, that God could work through whatever the enemy was handing us. Um, and while we at the end did not get him back, and that will forever be in my heart, and I will forever have a little bit of a struggle there, I can
Mhm.
see that there's a blessing there too. My husband and I have grown closer,
Mhm.
and we have been able to find God in the small, minute details
Mhm.
that I wasn't even paying attention to before. Um, there were a lot of moments that when we knew we wouldn't be able to have children, I grieved heavily, like a
Mhm.
lot of people who fight infertility do.
Mhm.
Um, but I wanted to be in the room when my child was born. I wanted to be able to be the first one to hold them. I wanted to be, there for their first feeding and their first bath and all of those things that feel to some people silly, but to me, it was all part of the experience.
Mhm.
And God gave me that despite what happened later. All of those dreams of mine still happened. I was in the room when he was born. I was the first one to hold him. I was the one that cut the cord. So God still gave me the desires of my heart.
Mhm.
Um, and we know that he's got a better plan and that we will be parents one day for the long haul.
Right. Right. I remember that first session very well, and I think the way that I phrased the question was, "Is God still good?"
That
In
is
the
how you
end
did
of
it.
this, yeah, if you do not get your child back, is God still good? And you didn't hesitate in your response. and the walking out of this journey, I have been honored and privileged to do with you through our sessions. The walking out of through this journey has been tough, but I have watched you spot, as you talked about, the hand of God in places where it sounds to me like previously you might not have been looking to see it. That's kind of what I heard you just say a few minutes ago. So moving through this part of your testimony, what I'm hearing you say is that counseling has sort of helped you look, like open your eyes in a way that perhaps they weren't before in situations or in trials. Yeah. Tri
Absolutely.
trials are I don't think we do, enough, honestly, I'm not slamming church, but I think we don't talk about suffering enough, um, as believers in church because it is a part of our lives. And Jesus said, "Pick up your cross and follow me, not your basket of posies," right? And so
Right.
it truly is a part of our transformation. Um, what do you think it's done? You said you and your husband are closer. You feel like your marriage is better. That's how you rephrased it. How
Yeah.
so?
I had heard forever, um, when trauma strikes a family, a lot of times families don't come out of it as strong. And so that was a valid fear when all of this started unraveling at the very beginning. Um, Naturally, the way I process stuff is completely different than the way my husband processes stuff.
Mhm,
And I'm not going to say that it was an easy journey, and it still
mhm,
isn't at times.
right.
Marriage in general isn't easy at times, but um, we've both kind of had to step back, and it's made us understand the other one in a different light. We've had to do a lot of self digging, like figure out who we are and how we process. I have led a fairly blessed life in that I haven't had immense amounts of trauma. I'm not going to say none, but I have not had something deeply heart wrenching um, outside the norm. So this was a completely new journey for me personally,
Mhm,
figuring out how to wade through those waters and what was actually a trauma response and what was just me overthinking or what was the kind of person that I am when it comes to this stuff. But my husband was on the same journey. And so sometimes those journeys clashed. But at the end of the day, we have figured out how to communicate better. A lot of thanks goes to LIA for that, though. You guys have kind of coached us and helped us walk through that journey. Um, Otherwise, we probably would not be in as good a spot as we are now. 2 years later, we have finally come to a place where we feel God's leading us to adopt again.
mhm,
And I can't say that that would be possible without the way that we have learned to communicate and talk through things and recognize when it's a trauma response versus just a personality trait.
mhm.
Um, so
That's
that's
really that's encouraging to hear. Thank you for sharing that, and we give all glory and honor to God for what you have found helpful through our ministry and the counseling that you've received. I'm curious, what did your family think about you going to counseling?
it's kind of split down the middle, actually. Um, Most of them, actually, all of them, have been incredibly supportive. Um, a couple of them were like, "Oh, well, that's good for you. I don't need that." Um, which is fine. That to each their own. God will lead them where He needs to lead them.
Mm,
But they've been very supportive. They immediately saw after that first session when I came home, uh, I was able to share some of the revelations that I had had in that first session, and I think they knew I needed help. They knew I was struggling with deeply, and so they were. None of them were against it. They firmly believe that mental health is important,
mhm,
and knowing that it was a God-centered form of mental health help
mhm,
made it even better.
mhm. Okay. What would you tell somebody who was thinking about seeking counseling, be it Christian or other focused? Like, what would you tell somebody who's struggling and they're not sure if they should do it?
You're not going to know for sure until you jump in. Um, you have to be honest with yourself first and foremost. And you have to be honest with whoever your counselor is. They can't help you if you don't open up.
Mhm.
But besides that, there's no shame in getting help. The mind is a tricky, tricky thing, and you can send yourself into a spiral very quickly. Even in a normal relationship, sometimes it takes those closest friends to point out things you're doing that harm yourself that you don't even realize.
Yeah.
Um, and having someone who can guide you not only in mental health and keeping you in the straight and narrow there, but having someone who not only does that but points you to Christ in the process.
Mhm.
Um, for me, that was life changing.
That's great that that was helpful for you. You know, sometimes people are afraid that if they go to counseling, emotions are going to come out, and emotions are scary for some of us. And we don't want to deal with our own, much less anybody else's. But they're scary. And sometimes people are afraid that if the emotion comes to the surface, it's just never going to stop. What would you tell that person about fear of experiencing emotion? Because you have been through a myriad of emotions going through counseling, grief,
Mhm.
sadness, deep sadness, anger, right? So, what would you tell somebody about that if they were afraid to open that up?
Emotions definitely can be scary. Um, but I think living with them suppressed and keeping that inside and all the turmoil it's going to cause inside, even if you don't realize that's what it's happening. For me, it brought up anxiety and um, all kinds of other issues where it just made me sick. There's such a relief in getting those out, even if it's scary when you push through. On the other side of that, you can live life much freer, clearer headed, and able to focus on whatever step is next for you.
So, thank you for answering that. So you mentioned a moment ago that you and your spouse are considering adopting again.
Yes.
What what do you think has brought you from the depths of anguish in the loss of your son through the adoption, the revoked adoption? Um, what do you think has brought you to the place now that you're willing to take that step? That's a huge step.
It is. It is. Um, we'll never get over losing him. He will always be our first. Um, but we know that we are called to be parents. And we also know that there was some purpose in all of that pain, whether it be that we helped birth mom get on her feet, or, maybe it was God protecting us from something down the road. I'll never know exactly, but I know that there was some purpose. Um, in the journey ahead, I'm not going to say that there's not fear and hesitation because there absolutely is. But the growth that we have experienced in knowing that God has a plan has given us a lot of peace to move forward. God has crossed every bridge that we've come to thus far. He's allowed us to walk hand in hand with Him through it, and that's not going to change in the next journey. Um, our son was a blessing in every way, shape, and form, and I wouldn't trade that month and a half we had him for anything. But I'm excited to be a mother to the child that God has for us forever.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. That's incredibly courageous. Having watched you walk this, there's a joy in my heart to watch you come to this point. I got to ask, where do you want to see yourself and your family a year from now?
With at least one little one. Um, and honestly, I would love to see our family being able to use our testimony for something beyond ourselves. God doesn't take us through hard things and through fire for nothing.
That's
He
right.
doesn't allow us to be refined in a fire without a purpose.
That's
Um,
exactly right. He
and
wastes
so
nothing.
not a thing.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see what he does with that in the future.
Yeah, that's great. So, um, I want to say thank you to you for being brave and joining me for this interview and being willing to share your heart and your testimony and your journey. And I don't take that lightly. I'm greatly appreciative of you. Is there anything else you would want to tell anybody who might be watching and listening to your story and the experience of counseling through life in abundance? Is there anything else you'd want to say to that person?
Just know that there is hope even in the darkest moment. Um, and that life in abundance is a great resource to help you walk through that and find that light. God is good all the time, even when you can't see it.
That's right. That's right. So, Erin, I want to thank you again personally for being willing, like I said, to share your testimony. And I know that there has been some community awareness of your story, and I know that you've had a ton of support through what you've walked through, court dates and all of that, and that watching you navigate those situations and watching your community come around you has been a blessing in the midst of all of it. So your story is edifying to others that are watching, and that's what it's about. I mean, we want it to count, right? If we go
Absolutely.
through it, we want it to count. And I once heard it said that our stories aren't our own; they're really for other people, other believers.
Very
So
true.
yeah, with that, I thank you so much. And again, it's been an honor and a pleasure and privilege to be able to talk with you today about this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.